Hello everyone, and thank you for coming to Lasers Online. My name is Mr. Brandon with the Erlanger branch of the Canton County Public Library. Today we're going to be talking about how to use one of our laser engravers to create some fun acrylic coasters. So let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing that we need to take a look at is going to be the machine itself, and that is going to be our Boss Laser. This is a LS1630 model, so it is a middle of the road option from Boss Laser. This is a medium industrial machine, and what that means is that it's capable of cutting through most softer materials, but it will typically tend to struggle once you try and cut harder materials like metal, marble, or anything of that nature. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look at our workspace. The interior of the machine allows for a 29-inch wide by 15-inch high piece. The material can be up to 7 inches thick. However, it is not going to cut through that 7-inch thick material. It will only engrave the very surface of it, or if it's thin enough, it will cut through it. The minimum requirement for cutting would be 3/8 of an inch. Anything over that, it's not going to be able to cut it. You will notice the 3 little red panels kind of hiding around the sides. Those can actually be removed for longer materials. So let's say if we wanted to engrave a 2x4, we could slide that through those 2 red panels on the side to engrave the middle of it before we use it to assemble something. Now, before we turn on the machine, let's go ahead and take a look at 2 other machines that we need to turn on with it. That is going to be the water chiller and the air compressor. The air compressor is very simple. It just provides enough airflow over the laser lens to make sure that no debris or smoke or dust or anything comes up and hits the lens itself, because those lenses are extremely sensitive and they usually don't take well to being banged up. The water chiller actually just cycles water over the glass tube that creates the laser in the back of the Boss Laser. So for this, it cycles cold water over the glass, and then once that water is too warm, it pulls it back in, re-chills it, and then cycles it back. So it's just a constant water cycle. The project that we're doing today is acrylic coasters. The fun thing about acrylic is that it can come in multiple different colors. So I've got some sheets kind of showing you some examples up there. Today, what we're going to be using, since it's going to be a Halloween theme, is black, some lime green, and some orange. The very first thing that we need to do is make sure that the laser is calibrated for the height of our material. You'll notice in this picture that I've got that the laser head is very far above the material surface. That's not what we want to do. We need to make sure that the laser head almost touches the surface of our material. We don't want it to scrape the material, but we do need to make sure that it's very, very close. So to do that, let's go ahead and make sure that our height is adjusted correctly. And I'm going to show you that here. To do this, we'll need to go into the vertical menu by hitting the ZU button. And then we're going to need to go down to the bottom of that menu to the autofocus option. And what that's going to do is when I hit enter, it's going to lift the build plate up. And when it does, it will leave the plate at an appropriate height to make sure that we're on track for our material. So after an autofocus, it would look like this. And this is exactly right. We want to be able to see a little bit of a gap between the laser head and the material surface, but we don't want to be able to slide our hand through it. These 3 images are what we're going to be using for our examples today. So let's go ahead and turn on our software. Just for a fun fact, this software is available at home. You guys can download it for free. It's available on Boss Laser's website. So if you want to try and practice at home, you can feel free to. Okay, so this is the Boss Laser software. It looks pretty complicated. However, there are only a few buttons that you really need to pay close attention to. The very first thing that we need to pay attention to is up here in the top left. We need to import our image. We're going to go ahead and start with our ghost. So I need to find my file on my desktop. And there's our ghost file. We're going to go ahead and open him. And there he is. Now, before we go too far, we need to make sure that his sizing is appropriate for what we want. So if you look at the grid behind him, each one of these lines will indicate an inch. So right now, he's about 6 inches. That's a bit much for a coaster. So what we're going to go ahead and do is resize him. And we'll just go ahead and make him about 3.5 inches, just to start with. Now what we need is we need a circle shape to indicate to the laser that we want the ghost inside of a circle to cut out so that we can end up with our coaster. So over on the left, we are going to go ahead and select our circle tool. And we're just going to rough in a circle real quick, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but that's okay. So we're going to go ahead and select the circle. And you'll notice up here in the top left, it gives me the height and width of my circle. As you can see, they're not perfect, but they're close. So let's go ahead and just type in a number. You'll notice also that the boss only works in millimeters. So if you don't know how to do the inches to millimeters conversion, it's handy to just pull that up on Google or the internet browser of your choice. So now what we're going to do is take our circle shape and drag it over our ghost, and we're going to try and line him up as best as we can to get him dead center in the coaster. And there we go. A handy thing to note is that you can change the color of different layers. The colors I normally use are black for if I'm going to engrave. So we're going to go ahead and leave the ghost black. And then for the circle shape that we want to cut out, I normally turn those red. That way I know what I'm going to engrave and what I'm going to cut out. Over on the right, you'll notice that we have each one of our layers in a separate line. That's good because we want to make sure that we do all of our engraving first and our cutting second, because if we cut first and the material moves, that's going to throw off our engrave. So let's go ahead and tell the laser what settings we want to use. For the engrave, we're going to go ahead and keep the laser at a standard 300 millimeters per second. As far as settings for the power go, that will impact how deep the engrave is going to be. Anything from a 60% to an 80% is normal. So let's go ahead and split the difference, and we are going to make sure that our engrave is even all the way around. So we're just going to use 70% for the whole thing. When I hit OK, that sets up the engrave layer. Now I need to come back over to the right hand side and I need to set up the cut layer. For cutting, your speed is going to be much slower and your power is going to be much higher. So in this case, I've worked with this material before, so I know that my speed needs to be 5 millimeters per second at 95% power. If this was a new material that you hadn't worked with before, you may want to do some test cuts or some test engraves to make sure that you're using the appropriate settings. So let's go ahead and hit OK on this. Now you'll notice that we've got all of our settings set up. We have our layout ready to go. So now we can go ahead and save this. That wasn't too hard. So we need to select our shapes. We need to come to the bottom right, and there's a special way to save these files to have them sent to the boss laser. So we're going to hit Save to U file, and we are just going to label this Ghost Engrave. And we're going to save it to the desktop. We're going to hit Save. And it'll give us a handy little message saying that it's done. And that's all there is to it. So our files are ready now. So let's go ahead and try to upload these guys. When we're uploading, There are several steps that you'll need to make sure that you pay extra special attention to. The very first thing that we're going to do is make sure that we save our design on a flash drive. We're then going to insert it into the boss laser. We're going to hit File. Then we need to go to the UDisk Plus option. Once we do that, we need to hit Read so it can open all the files. There's our file. We need to copy it to the internal memory so the machine can actually use it. Once we're done copying, we can go ahead and hit Escape twice. And now our file is on the machine. Our next step is making sure that our project is all the way on our material. That's often referred to as framing. And what that means is that the laser head is going to show you exactly where your project is going to end up on your material surface. So let's go ahead and show you what that looks like. For this, when you hit frame, you'll notice that the laser head will kind of bounce around and form a little square shape. This is showing you where the coaster is going to get cut out on your material. For this, you would want to make sure that the laser head doesn't actually move off of your material. If it does, it usually means that you're going to end up with a straight edge on something that you don't want to have a straight edge, or it could mess up your project. So for this, it stayed on our material surface, so we are good to go to the next step. Now, we're actually going to start the project. All that entails is hitting the start button on the machine. I'm not going to make you watch the whole engraving process because each of these coasters is going to clock in about 5 or 6 minutes, depending on how much it has to engrave. But I'm going to go ahead and show you a little taste of what that looks like. You'll notice for the engrave sections, the laser moves left to right in very tight lines to do the engraving. You'll also notice that the light that it's outputting is not its maximum power. When it moves to the cut, it gets much brighter and it goes all the way through the material. Once that's done, we end up with something that looks like this. So we have our shape, it's cut out, we have our ghost engraved onto the material surface, and we are ready to the next step. You'll notice, though, that looking at our coaster, we have a little brown parchment paper cover on there. That's actually to protect from all that dust that you see on the ghost surface. Without the protective layer, all that dust would kind of stick to the coaster itself, and we don't want to do that. So with this, we need to make sure that we brush it off before we move any further. Once we brush it off, it looks much cleaner, but it can still be cleaned up a little bit more. So you typically want to take a wet rag and just kind of wash any excess bits on there that you have off. At this step, it's also safe to go ahead and peel that black layer for the parchment off so we can see the black layer for the actual acrylic. And there's our coaster. So you can see the cute little ghost on there. And for this, we would just repeat the process until we had all 3 of our coasters. Now these 3 coasters are pretty simple, the ghost and the jack-o'-lantern especially, but with Frankenstein, you can see a little bit more detail. The boss can handle any amount of detail. You just need to make sure that your file is appropriately detailed. If it's too big or too small, and you try and do too much with it, that can lead to problems. But hopefully everyone enjoyed my presentation on the Boss Laser, and hopefully I'll see you soon to make some fun Halloween coasters. If you have any questions, as always, please give us a call at 859-962-4331. Thanks, and have a nice day, everyone.